May 1945. The guns fall silent, the Third Reich collapses, and with it the Luftwaffe, once the pride of German air power, simply disintegrates. In a matter of days, an air force that had terrorized Europe lies abandoned across the continent. On runways, in forests, and inside shattered hangars, thousands of German aircraft sit motionless, some fully operational, others stripped for parts, many only half-finished visions of what might have become the next generation of aerial warfare. For Allied troops moving into the heart of Germany, the sight was surreal. Fighters, bombers, gliders, experimental prototypes, and the world's first operational jet aircraft lay scattered in silence, as if frozen in time. The war's final months had starved the Luftwaffe of fuel, spare parts, and functioning command structures. Many units hadn't flown in weeks. Pilots surrendered where they stood. Mechanics walked away from their posts, and entire groups of aircraft were left exactly where they happened to run out of kerosene. By 8th May 1945, Victory in Europe Day, the Luftwaffe existed only on paper. Across northern Germany, airfields at Lübeck, Flensburg, Schleswig, and dozens more were carpeted with abandoned machines. In Czechoslovakia, the airfields around Prague contained neatly parked rows of Messerschmitt fighters, Heinkel bombers, and late-war experimental aircraft whose designers never had the chance to test them. At Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's premier research and evaluation hub, Allied investigators walked into a treasure trove of wind tunnel models, blueprints, prototypes, and the remnants of projects so advanced that some Allied engineers struggled to grasp the concepts. What stunned Allied officers most was the variety and sophistication of what had survived. Side by side with familiar wartime workhorses like the Bf-109 and FW-190 were sleek Arado R-234 jet bombers, the tiny but fast Heinkel, He-1 6-2 Volksjäger, and fragments of exotic designs such as the forward-swept wing Junkers Ju-287, transport aircraft like the Ju-52, and reconnaissance types like the He-111 sat scattered in fields, often abandoned in perfect condition, simply because no one had the fuel to fly them away. By the time the last German units surrendered, the Luftwaffe's administrative backbone had collapsed entirely. Many commanders handed themselves over to whichever Allied army they happened to encounter. Maintenance records were incomplete or lost, fuel depots had been destroyed or looted, and supply networks had crumbled weeks before the final capitulation. In the immediate aftermath, the Allied Control Commission issued strict directives. All German aircraft were grounded. No German pilot could take to the air without Allied approval, and any unauthorized flight would be treated as a hostile act. The war was over, but the skies still needed policing. Yet what to do with this vast aerial graveyard quickly became a matter of debate. Some Allied officers insisted that every German aircraft, no matter its condition, represented a potential danger if left intact. Others recognized that buried in these machines was technology years ahead of anything the Allies had fielded. Jet propulsion, swept wings, advanced aerodynamics, rocket-powered interceptors. Germany had pushed aviation research to its limits, even as its armies collapsed on the ground. The question was not simply whether to destroy these aircraft, but who would get first access to study them. Thus began a quiet race, one not fought with guns or tanks, but with clipboards, transport trucks, and intelligence teams scouring airfields. The Americans, British, and Soviets each rushed to secure the most advanced designs they could find. knowing that whatever they captured could shape the next era of military aviation. Some aircraft were tested, some were shipped across oceans, some were hidden or secretly claimed despite Allied agreements, and thousands more would soon be marked for destruction, melted down into raw metal for Europe's reconstruction. This is the story of what happened in those first days and weeks after Germany's surrender, when the skies over Europe were suddenly filled not with combat, but with abandoned machines, desperate intelligence missions, and a global scramble to understand, preserve, or dismantle the technological legacy of the Luftwaffe. As soon as the last German units laid down their arms, the victorious Allies realized they were standing amid the remnants of a military aviation program that was both enormous and astonishingly advanced. What lay across Germany in the spring of 1945 was more than wreckage. It was a technological inheritance, one the Allies had no intention of ignoring. The airfields captured by Allied troops contained not only familiar aircraft from the Battle of Britain or the Eastern Front, but also machines that seemed decades ahead of their time. Jet-powered fighters, rocket interceptors, and secret prototypes, technology that, if Germany had been able to mass-produce it earlier, could have altered the trajectory of the air war. For the Americans, the opportunity was too important to waste. On May 9th, just one day after the official German surrender, the U.S. Army Air Forces launched Operation Lusty, short for Luftwaffe Secret Technology. Led by Colonel Harold Watson, a veteran test pilot and engineer, this operation mobilized specially trained teams of mechanics, pilots, intelligence officers, and engineers. These men would later become known by a memorable nickname, Watson's Whizzers. Their mission was straightforward but monumental. The Whizzers fanned out across Germany in small teams, often racing against British and Soviet units heading toward the same targets. They found Me-262 jets at Lechfeld, Arado bombers in Denmark, and prototypes tucked away in rural hangars. What could be flown was flown. What couldn't was dismantled and loaded onto massive C-54 transports heading west. These captured machines eventually made their way to Wright Field in Ohio, where American test pilots prepared to unlock their secrets. Meanwhile, the British launched Operation Surgeon, a mission similar in purpose but broader in scope. While the Americans prioritized the aircraft themselves, the British focused equally on the people behind the designs, the engineers, aerodynamicists, engine specialists, and factory managers who had pushed German aviation forward. Many of these experts were interrogated. Some were recruited into British research programs under carefully monitored agreements. RAF Farnborough, the heart of Britain's aviation research, became a temporary home for captured aircraft like the Me-262 and the diminutive Ha-162 jet. British test pilots, many of whom had cut their teeth flying Spitfires during the war, now found themselves climbing into machines built by their former enemies. Their detailed reports helped Britain refine its own early jet strategies during the uncertain years after the war. The Soviet Union took a different but equally aggressive approach. Red Army trophy brigades swept through Germany's east, removing anything related to aviation technology. Entire factories were dismantled and shipped east, including tooling equipment and partially assembled aircraft. German engineers who fell within the Soviet zone were compelled to continue their research under new supervision. At test centers near Moscow, Soviet designers examined captured Me-262s and R-234s, analyzing the engines and airframes that would influence early Cold War designs. Tension quickly developed among the Allies. While cooperation existed on paper, in practice, each power recognized the strategic value of the Luftwaffe's technological legacy. With the world already shifting toward a new geopolitical confrontation, jet engines and swept-wing aerodynamics were no longer simply engineering curiosities. They were the opening moves in the next arms race. One of the most extraordinary places to fall into Allied hands was Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's central testing and evaluation facility. Comparable to the American Wright Field, Rechlin was where Germany examined new aircraft designs, pushed prototypes to their limits, and refined the machines destined for combat. By the time Allied forces reached the facility, it was a shadow of itself. Bombing raids had destroyed runways and buildings, and many engineers had fled or attempted to hide sensitive documents. Still, what remained was astonishing. Allied investigators discovered some of these ideas were theoretical, others existed only as prototypes, but many demonstrated an understanding of aviation that would not be matched by other nations until years later. The Me-262, for instance, featured swept wings, not for stealth or aesthetics, but because Messerschmitt designers recognized their value in reducing drag at high speeds. Elsewhere, in underground factories carved into mountainsides, Allied forces found even more surprising materials. Designing aircraft late in the war had required secrecy, and Germany responded by moving much of its production into subterranean networks. These factories held unfinished fuselages, half-assembled engines, and workers who had spent the war trying to meet impossible production quotas under brutal conditions. For many Allied officers, these discoveries underscored just how close Germany had come to fielding a radically different air force. The Me-262 had already proven itself dangerous even in limited numbers, while the exotic Me-163 rocket interceptor had terrified Allied bomber crews with its blistering speed. If these programs had matured sooner, the skies over Europe in 1944 and 1945 might have looked very different. Despite the capture of advanced aircraft, thousands of Luftwaffe machines still remained scattered across Europe at the end of the war. Their fate was sealed by the Allied Control Council, which issued a simple and uncompromising directive. Germany was to possess no military aircraft of any kind. That meant nearly everything. Fighters, bombers, gliders, trainers, and helicopters had to be destroyed. What followed was one of the largest scrapping operations in aviation history. Airfields in Germany, Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands were transformed into vast metal graveyards. Bulldozers pushed aircraft into rows where crews stripped them of anything valuable before cutting them apart. Some planes were crushed under tanks, others were burned. Still others were loaded onto barges and sunk in deep waters. In northern Germany, RAF disposal teams handled most of the destruction. Bases like Lübeck and Schleswig became industrial-scale scrap sites. Entire bomber fleets that had survived the war were dismantled. Even rare jets and prototypes met their end unless they had already been tagged for scientific analysis. In Denmark, the airfield at Grove housed long rows of abandoned fighters awaiting the cutting torch. In Norway, German aircraft left behind by retreating forces were similarly destroyed, often without any attempt to preserve them. Soviet-held territories saw comparable disposal programs, though the USSR kept a larger share of aircraft for research before scrapping the rest. Economic pressures also drove the destruction. Europe needed steel and aluminum to rebuild shattered cities and revive struggling industries. A single bomber contained enough metal to manufacture hundreds of consumer goods. For many communities, scrapping Luftwaffe planes became a source of steady employment at a time when jobs were scarce and reconstruction was only beginning. By 1948, nearly the entire Luftwaffe inventory, once counted in the tens of thousands, had vanished. Despite the systematic scrapping, a handful of Luftwaffe aircraft did not go directly to the breaker's yard. Some found new homes in the air forces of countries trying to rebuild quickly or operate cheaply in the early post-war years. Czechoslovakia, the Avia legacy. Czechoslovakia inherited entire aircraft assemblies, engines, and production machinery from German factories in its territory. Engineers assembled a new fighter from leftover Bf 109 parts, using a non-German engine that gave the aircraft a unique and notoriously difficult personality. This became the Avia S-199, an aircraft that would eventually be used by the newly formed Israeli Air Force during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Spain, the last 109. Spain, which had produced German fighters under license, continued building a modified Bf 109 variant, the Hispano Aviation HA-1-112, well into the 1950s. These aircraft became famous decades later for portraying German fighters in the film The Battle of Britain. Norway and France-Norway operated captured trainers and fighters for a short time, while France used Junkers Ju-52s, renamed Toucans, in colonial transport roles. These aircraft served into the 1950s before spare parts ran dry. As the Cold War took shape, however, German aircraft rapidly became obsolete. Jets like the British Meteor and American F-84 set new performance standards, and former Luftwaffe types were retired, scrapped, or relegated to storage. Today, only a small number of original Luftwaffe aircraft survive in museums around the world. Many were pulled from crash sites, buried wrecks, or remote lakes where they had lain undisturbed for decades. Restorers often had to combine parts from multiple wrecks to produce a single complete airframe. Examples of surviving or restored aircraft include Me-2 62 jets in Washington, Munich, and London, FW-190S recovered from lakes in Norway, Bf 109S rebuilt using parts from multiple sources, the extremely rare Arado R-234 in the Smithsonian, He-162 jets restored for display in Germany and Canada. Private companies have also built flying replicas of the Me-262 and FW-190 using original plans and modern construction methods, giving airshow audiences a rare glimpse of what these machines were capable of. Yet, despite modern restorations, the number of authentic Luftwaffe aircraft is minuscule compared to the vast wartime fleet. The destruction programs of 1945 to 1948 erased nearly everything. What remains is only a fragment of a once massive force, silent, static, and preserved behind museum glass. The collapse of the Luftwaffe in 1945 produced one of the most unusual chapters in aviation history. Germany's surrender scattered advanced aircraft across a devastated continent. The Allied scramble to capture, study, or destroy these machines helped shape the next generation of aviation technology, even as thousands of aircraft were melted down and vanished forever. What survives today offers only a small glimpse into the ambitions and innovations of wartime German engineering. After 1945, the Luftwaffe's aircraft shifted from tools of war to relics of a defeated regime. The Allies seized, studied, and sometimes preserved these machines, extracting knowledge that would shape post-war aviation. Yet most were deemed surplus and melted down, their aluminum repurposed to rebuild a devastated Europe. Only a few survived, forgotten, hidden, or deliberately preserved, and today they stand in museums as rare glimpses of a vanished technological era. Beyond steel and rivets, their lasting legacy lies in the innovations they inspired, reminding us how quickly advanced technologies can disappear and how history pivots in mere days.